Hi, everyone. Just making sure all the person at the back can hear me. Yeah? All right. Thank you so much for coming to Malware Village as well. Like, I do see a lot of familiar faces here. And again, I hope you guys like malware. So that's why I brought to you guys the final keynote for today, which will be the unnatural history of malware by me. So it's going to be like kind of like a final wrap up to the Malware Village. So yeah, just again, who actually tried to analyze the malware at the village? Don't be shy. Okay. Well, that's fine because right now I'm going around various conferences in Europe as well as, next up I will be hosting it in Las Vegas, Malware Village at DEF CON as well. So I do hope to see you all there. But even if you can't make it to the US, that's totally fine because we know what's going on. So yeah. So anyways, let's get into the talk. So, I'm gonna do a short self-intro. I am Lena Yu, also known as Lambda Mamba. So, I'm the founder of World Cyber Health and the founder of Malware Village, and also the creator of Malmons, also known as Malware Monsters. So actually, before I got into malware analysis, I did a lot of low-level computer stuff, which includes things like trusted execution environments, and RISC-V. So a lot of the times, right, again, people think, oh, like malware is not so related to low level, but that's not true. Because when you do get into malware analysis, especially when you get really deep into it, a lot of the times you will be dealing with assembly language. So me as a ex-compiler optimization researcher as well, something that I say a lot is what makes a good malware analyst. It's the ability to express complex concepts in very abstracted manner while still maintaining its essence, right? So analogy I like to use a lot is what makes a good compiler. It's for the compiler to be able to translate high-level language into low-level language in the least amount of instructions possible while still maintaining its meaning. So this concept doesn't just apply to malware analysis, but anything you do in general, right? A lot of the times people say, well, if you can explain something to a 5-year-old, that means you understand the thing well, right? So that's what I mean. And then I will get into more in depth of this later because a big part of my talk today will be expressing malware as a story to tell people how they behave, how they survive, and what goes on to make not just malware analysis more interesting, but more accessible to the general population. So in my talk, I like to do a lot of comparison between malware and living things. Well, I mean, here I specifically say pathogens, right? But some people argue, are biological viruses even alive? Well, that is up to debate because some people say it's not alive. Some people say it is. But in this talk, I just refer to viruses, bacteria, whatever, as pathogens. So the definition here, at least in the context of this talk, would be any biological agent that has evolved or adapted to invade a host organism and cause harm to its biological systems, right? So I'm going to compare and contrast this to malware. So my definition, again, there is a lot of definitions out there on what exactly malware is, right? Some people do say the CrowdStrike, like the blue screen of death thing is considered as malware. Some people say that. But at least in my definition here, it's any software that is intentionally developed to cause harm to the victim device. So what's important here is the intentional part, right? So again, you're free to disagree, but at least in the context of my talk here and my research focuses on this part intentionally. So again, we will be comparing and contrasting what's the difference between pathogens and malware, right? So there's actually a lot of similarities, and some of these things include, dependent on the host for survival. In the case of pathogens, it would be the organisms, right? These could be things like a mice, like a bigger, like amoeba, whatever. Like it can be even be humans, right? But for the malware, the host would be the device, right? So again, if I backtrack into the previous definition of pathogens and malware, it's the harm parts that's important. I mean, there are definitely malware out there that doesn't really do much to cause harm, but at least it's still at least in the context of this talk, I mean specifically it causes harm, right? So in the case of pathogens, it would include things like cell damage, death, and things worse than death. And for malware, it would cause things like loss of data, resources, money to the victim. And there's actually many, many similarities here, which I will not get into depth because there's just too many. So in case of focusing on the similarities, I decided to focus on the differences. So malware is considered unnatural because it's man-made, right? But pathogens are natural because it's not man-made. However, we want to go back to what exactly does it mean to be natural? So in the traditional term, in the traditional definition of what natural is, it is existing in or derived from nature, not made or caused by humankind. But again, what's natural and what exactly is mankind, right? So the digital ecosystem I'm talking about here, which could include things like your devices, the network, the servers, and things, yes, those are made by mankind. However, just like every other biological entity, malware must survive, adapt, evolve, compete for resources, right? So here, even though mankind has created this digital ecosystem, it really has not much control over which malware exactly thrives or dies, right? So here we get into what is unnatural. So given the fact that the traditional definition of natural is whether or not it's made by mankind. But the way that malware behaves in this digital ecosystem, which is also man-made, is rather natural. So again, just like every other biological entity in the natural world, malware either thrives or dies based on whether it can adapt and evolve to the external pressures. But again, it's still technically man-made, right? So in order to just kind of express what I mean here, I decided to coin this term called unnatural with a bracket, because it could kind of mean both things at once. Natural, but unnatural at the same time. Because in the real world, in the natural world, it is unnatural, right? I mean, if we don't have computers, malware just wouldn't exist. But within this digital ecosystem that we created, it acts rather naturally, just like every other biological entity. So here I started to ask some questions. What if we study malware as if it was a biological entity? And what if, this also means if we treat it that way, that also means that maybe we could also apply concepts from the natural sciences to malware analysis. So here we start to define what exactly is the digital ecosystem, right? So as I previously mentioned, these could basically include things like personal computers, servers, internet, and more things we're all connected basically. And as an easier definition, basically a habitat where the malware lives. So again, just like how we compared malware to biological entities, there exists multiple families of malware, which is akin to biological species in the natural world. So again, here, you see the list of malware families on Malpedia. So you get things like Lumastila. It's a bit hard to see here, but if you go to Malpedia families, you will see a whole bunch of things. And these could also be further classified as loaders, worm, ransomware, each having distinct characteristics, which makes it unique, right? So this is actually really similar to biological species, just like how this like taxonomy tree goes. Like you got things like, I mean, again, it's a bit hard to see, but you see all these like branching out. You see like starfish, you see like sharks and crabs and octopi, and stuff like that, right? It branches out. But you know that starfish are different than crocodiles, right? So, I mean, they're still living. It's just like they have unique characteristics that separates that specific species from the other one, right? So, right, just as we discussed earlier, we thought about, I mean, given the fact that there are so many similarities between malware and pathogens, what if we could apply concepts that we apply to studying pathogens, which includes evolutionary game theory? So what exactly is evolutionary game theory? It is the application of game theory, which is a field of mathematics, to evolving populations in biology, and it defines a framework of contest strategies and analytics into which Darwinian competitions can be modeled. So here evolutionary game theory itself is a huge field with a lot of things which I will not get into detail given the time limit, but I will get into some of the strategies that are pretty well known in the field, right? So one of this would include the pure strategy, which is a predefined deterministic choice of action that a player makes regardless of the actions or outcome of others. Another example would be mixed strategies, which involves the player randomly choosing among the available actions with a specific probability distribution rather than choosing a single action for sure. Another one would be the tit for tat strategy, which is, involving cooperation on the first move and then replicating the opponent's previous actions in subsequent rounds. So this could sound like scientific jargon at the moment, but I will try my best to get you guys to understand. Like, I'm not saying that, like, I'm not writing like a compendium of like game theory here. I'm just trying to introduce the concept of how evolutionary game theory could be applied to the study of malware analysis. And this is just scratching the surface. So one example of the use of pure strategies of existing malware would be I Love You, which had a mass outbreak in 2000. So this is an example of pure strategy because it relied on one deterministic action, which was an email attachment accompanied by social engineering. And then once the person falls for it and then opens the attachment, it will send itself to all its contacts. Because of that, the outbreak was very, very fast. And then there was a lot of damages as well, right? Because once it was unleashed, even the attacker itself just couldn't control. Like, they can't stop it because at that time, right? Like, internet wasn't really a thing. So there's no C2 servers where the author could just tell it to kill itself, right? So yeah, that's a pure example of a pure strategy. It had no fallback strategy. So it was also pretty not so resilient because once people did start to see what was going on, like block emails coming with this context, pretext of love letter, it would just block it, right? There's that's why it was, as soon as there was some like emergency patch or stuff like that, things like this would just die off immediately. Another example would be the simile, which is an example of a mixed strategy. So this was actually released in 2002, and here it was pretty unique because it introduced randomness. right? So what this means is it has a 50% chance of infecting the file and metamorphosizing. So metamorphosize here means changing its code. So if it's like antiviruses, that's dependent on signatures, right? If the code changes, the hash changes. So this kind of things would evade these kind of traditional detection systems. Plus the fact that it skipped 50% of files, right? Means that, yeah, there could have been some like honeypot files, right? And then by having this kind of randomness, by skipping it, like AVs just wouldn't detect it. And then actually this, it invested a huge amount of its effort into the metamorphosis part, which apparently it took up 90% of the code in the virus itself. So another example of a malware using a well-known game theory strategy would be the emotet, which would be an example of tit for tat. So in the previous definition of what exactly tit for tat was, right, it talked about cooperating in the first round and retaliating based on how the other person acts. So here, in this game, what I mean by cooperation is suppose we have a setup between malware versus defenders. So by cooperating, it just means that the defender doesn't really crack down or do anything aggressive to try to take down emotet. It just means kind of doing nothing, right? So that also kind of benefits the emotet in a way that it doesn't need to invest extra resources into evolving and surviving. So that is what I mean by cooperation here. It doesn't mean that they're working together to like infect people. That's not what I mean. It just means that they're just not actively trying to fight against each other. So in this context, right, defecting would mean to actually do more aggressive, like actually trying to undermine and sabotage the other. So that means if the defender actually, like in this case, right, for example, if law enforcement actually goes above and beyond to try to do like a crackdown and take down the C2, then emotet would retaliate by updating bots and using like new backup servers and things like that. Other things would include, for example, if the email providers start blocking, like mass blocking these like invoice emails, then it will start to update its tactic by changing the pretext, like changing it to COVID-19 health alerts, shipping delivery scams, and more. So again, how emotet reacts is based on how the defender acts. So again, emotet was first detected in 2014, but to this day, the operations are still ongoing because this is kind of like ongoing, continuous game, which both sides, both the defenders and the threat actors of emotet are evolving alongside each other. So another example, but another interesting case of malware interactions in this unnatural ecosystem would be the symbiotic relationship, where different families of unique malware can collaborate, right? So these could be things like Lotus, InfoStealers, and ransomware working together to deliver a powerful infection. So what's important here is all this malware involved in this symbiotic relationship is developed independent of each other, right? So that means this author who made the private loader is not aware of the development behind some other ransomware. But in the end, when they are deployed together, they are working together symphonically in a way that does not conflict with each other. So in my virus bulletin paper, I detailed what exactly conflicts mean, right? Because again, it is not easy to define what exactly collaboration means. So at least we could define what exactly conflict means. So in this paper, I highlighted how, for example, ransomware conflicting each other would mean things like more than one ransomware encrypting files at the same time, which would mean that the ransomware are double encrypting each other, which is not great for the ransomware. So, I mean, ransomware can go above and beyond to try to prevent this kind of double encryption by, by double checking the extensions, by checking if other similar ransomware processes are running, and things like that. Because as a ransomware developer, you're basically just mostly after money. So you don't really want like a rival ransomware gang to be basically kind of stealing your customers, right? So again, other interaction would mean things like malware attempting to kill each other. Because again, malware authors, I mean, we do refer to them as the bad guys, but it's not that the bad guys are working together, right? I mean, they're mostly selfish most of the time. They just want money. And again, even the good guys, we're not all on good terms with each other, are we? Right? Just like how the bad guys are. So that's why there could be cases where the bad guys the malware are actually trying to kill each other. In the case of Mirai botnets. So here, like if Mirai and so those kind of botnet malware detect that the device that they're trying to infect is already infected by some other rival botnet, it's going to try to kill each other, right? So again, that's why it's important to know if a conflict exists or not, because again, not every malware author is on good terms with each other, just like how the good guys are not on good terms with each other. So I'm going to get into the perspective of a non-natural historian. So what is the unnatural sciences, right? Because we already defined the term unnatural. So it's not natural to have things in the field of unnatural science, just like how we have natural science, natural history. I think it makes sense to have unnatural science, unnatural history. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So again, we previously talked about how we can treat malware as if it's a living thing, where it must survive, adapt, and evolve in order to not go extinct, right? So as a way to try to get this concept across, I made malmons, which is also known as malware monsters. So this is the malmons I made so far. Again, it's a little bit difficult to see here, but if you're brave enough to scan the QR codes, the repository of the malmons that I drew are available there for download, and you're more than welcome to use it in your servers as emojis and stuff like that. So actually, in the age of AI-generated artwork, right, I drew these by hands, like here, right? So, of course, there were people that came up to me and be like, oh, like, is this like AI-generated, right? I don't know whether I should take that as a compliment, because don't get me wrong, AI art is not that bad sometimes. If, I'm not defending like people who just use AI. Me as an artist itself, of course, I'd love to see more hand-drawn artwork, not like AI generated, right? But at the same time, if you just flat out accuse artists, oh, is this like AI generated? Maybe they might not be so happy. So don't do that, please, right? If you want to like double check or something, if they are willing to post things like this, the time lapse, right? I think at the moment, it's not so easy for AI to generate these time-lapse sketches, even though it does excel at other video generating things. And then I hope it stays that way. So I actually went another step further, and I decided to animate these as well by hand. So again, if you want to, you're more than welcome to use these like digital, like malmons in whatever, like your servers and stuff like emojis, right? Because I wanted to make this kind of open source and available to everyone. And then one big reason as to why some malware are successful is because, I mean, it spreads, right? Malware authors don't sell their malware to get, like, to the victim, right? You just infect, right? I'm not saying that I'm trying to infect everyone's minds with malmons, but at the same time, that's kind of what I'm saying. So, yeah, let that go viral, like malware, please. Come on. At least it's better to have these on your computers than actual malware, right? I mean, who can, like, what do you guys think? Yeah? Yeah, right? So, another thing I've been doing with malmons is drawing these picture books. Because as I mentioned previously, what makes a good compiler? Again, it's the ability to translate high-level language into low-level language in the least amount of instructions possible while still maintaining its meaning. Kind of similar to why I draw cartoons. Because malware itself is a super complex concept in many people's minds. But if you express it in cartoons, you're technically taking that high-level concept and then expressing that in cartoons with as little strokes as possible, right? So, for example, here is a Slammer Malmon that I made. So here, this is Slammer, a computer worm from 2003 that caused a massive denial of service on internet hosts. Slammer exploited a buffer overflow bug in Microsoft's SQL Server and Desktop Engine database products. It bombarded routers with extreme traffic, causing them to collapse. This caused a slowdown of systems worldwide. So if you look closely, right, this carnival hammer thing, I don't know how you all call it, but I mean, I'm trying to express the fact that it's overflowing by this bell thing breaking part, right? And, so Slammer spreads rapidly, infected servers, and it, like, once infected, right, it just fired out UDP packets as fast as possible. And when a packet hit a vulnerable device, it was immediately infected. Just like how, like, you know, this is kind of like a chain reaction as to how, like, you know, nuclear stuff work, right? It's like you got stuff spewing out these, like, particles and, like, it just bumps into the particle next to it and then just, like, keeps, like, going on in a chain reaction. That's what I'm trying to express here. And here, I'm trying to express how the entire worm was only 376 bytes and fits inside a single packet. And also, this small size is what allowed it to propagate extremely fast. So just like how you see on this digital scale here, of course as an artist who was trying to explain this, right, it wasn't so easy for me to express how exactly, what exactly 376 bytes would mean. So this is where where expressionism comes into play. So I'm going to talk about how, like, there exist the natural history books. Like, this is an example from the Victorian era. I mean, you can see, like, I don't know if that's supposed to be an eel or a snake, but, yeah, you get the point. Okay. In this era, people didn't have the internet, nor did they have AI. So if they wanted an image of, like, an eel or snake, most of the time, they had to actually go see the physical eel or snake. And then if it was, if you were in, like, Victorian UK, and then if you wanted to draw diagrams about some eel snake thing in, I don't know, Galapagos, probably either you had to have this, like, dead sample in some, like, formaldehyde or something, or you had to actually go there, or they had a specimen somewhere, right? So, again, that's, natural history books. So that's what I'm doing now with Malmons. I decided to make the Unnatural History book, which I'm working on right now, by the way. So this is an example of the Stuxnet Malmon. So if you look closely, right, that's all drawn on paper with a fountain pen, just like how people back then used to do them, right? So, if you look closely, right, when I designed these Malmons, I actually did, include a lot of symbolism. As you can see here, right? because I was expecting to do something like this anyways. So you can see that, I mean, if you guys know what Stuxnet is, it's related to taking down the Iranian nuclear program. So that's why it's got this like yellow cake color with these like fin thingies that look like nuclear symbols, right? And then, if you look closely, even the tail and the tongue and stuff is shaped like a USB because the infection vector was via USBs. So this is another place where I explain the anatomy behind why I designed it that way, right? So if you look closely, right, the eyes is kind of like these like spiral things, which is, I mean, I tried to make it look like centrifuge, like spinny things, right? And then here is the tongue and the tail, which is shaped like a USB, just like how it would infect devices, right? So here's some other examples. Like I'm still working on this, so I do not have the entire like set, but I'm cooking up some things, so stay tuned. So this is an example of Indestroyer Malmon, right? You can see that it's like kind of this like rusty dragon thing. And then that's just like a, so it's also like an ICS malware. So it's got these like power grid things coming out. So actually for besides Exeter, I designed this wire lurker malmon because some people told me that people at besides Exeter apparently loves wire lurker. Who said that? Was it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, just some context behind what exactly wire lurker is it's a malware that is known to target Apple iOS devices. And then it's kind of unique because, I mean, you don't really come across that in the iPhone malware, right? So, I mean, if you look closely, right, you could see the tail is shaped like a lightning cable. And I mean, you see these like little patterns on the back. It's like, it's supposed to be a USB, like the ports for iOS devices, right? And it's like, it's got this like Apple thing because Apple, right? Yeah, that's that. And yeah, so when I first arrived at Exeter like a few days ago, I was actually painting this watercolor artwork of wire lurker, which I did put out on the raffle. So, right, yeah, there. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but
I love that.
right, yeah, that. So I don't know who the lucky person is going to be to win that, but yeah, okay. So that's the complete artwork. And then actually I'm cooking up some cool stuff for Mamons, like this Mamon Tamagotchi looking thing. So stay tuned. So the key takeaways from this talk would be what it means to be unnatural. And we could, as discussed in this talk, we borrowed concepts from the natural sciences. And just like how evolutionary game theory can be used to model population survival, we explored about how it could be potentially used to analyze malware to improve defenses. And then we also talked about how basically malware can be personified and treated as if it's a living creature, just like how, like the reason behind why I made malmons. So right now, as our organization, World Cyber Health, which is a nonprofit incorporated in Canada, we are, like me and my team, are working on various things behind the scenes, like organizing Malware Village, which includes competitions like Mach 1, which stands for Malware Analysis Report Competition, Bombay, which stands for Battle of Malware, Bypass and EDR, and EMIAC, which stands for Efficient Malware Yara Analysis Competition. And again, this is also something this organization, I'm also using it to back up Malmon. So we get to make things like those Malmon games, the books and things like that. And then we're also working on something called No Havoc, which stands for networked online helpline for all victims of cybercrime. I came up with that name, by the way. So, yes, do support us on our mission. And let's all unite to make the world a better place. Thank you.
In 2 seconds, we can get ready for the CTF results, raffle and the auction. And apparently Adam's whinging because he's all the way up there and it's going to take him a while to get down here. Oh, so on that note, can we sing happy birthday? Because it is his birthday today. So while he walks down the steps, everybody, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Adam's currently sober. Happy birthday to you. And he's still younger than me.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You get a special speaker version
Oh,
as
thank
well.
you. Yay! Thank you so much.
And that was also handful.
Yeah, I talked to the designer and I told her that I absolutely love this. Like, this is
An amazing job.
this is like S tier. Like, legit. Like, I've been to so many B-sides, but this is like up there. Like,
Thank you so much.
Have you got the prizes, Adam?
Questions.
Yes. Because
Royal Paddock.
isn't it
Did we offer any questions?
I don't know, Pete, was there questions at the end of that? I only walked in up for the clapping.
I jumped.
Jumped on, didn't you?
yeah.
Still got 3 minutes.
We. Oh, right.
We'll do that while we get questions.
Yeah, actually, yes, that would.
Does anyone have questions for Lena? Is that right?
Yeah, so anyways, I will be here like until the end of today. So if you guys have any questions, just hit me up anytime, or you could just ask me now.
You can, yeah.
Right.
Just put your hand up and I'll run up with the microphone while we're setting up. Oh, one there.
Just because you're obviously talking about evolution, and obviously one of the hilarious things about evolution and past different species that seems to happen again and again is stuff becomes crabs. Is there the malware equivalent of everything turning into crabs?
So I guess like the carcinogification, like crabification. Yes, I've seen that meme. Actually, good point. And just like how there is a lot of conversion evolution happening here, there are malware that kind of end up evolving into something similar, right? So right nowadays, if you look, right, there's a lot of stealer malwares prevalent. And all of those are most likely developed independently of the authors. Because again, it is what affects, I guess, survival and how it converges. Because like for crabs, right, its form, like this roundish body with like legs on the side, right, it was apparently very good for its environment, for its survival as compared to some other shape, right? So that's because of the fact that that body shape was good for that survival in that environment, independent of whether they are genetically related or not. So like, for example, stealers, right? These can include things like snake keylogger, like red line stealers and things like that, because they are profitable. That's why a lot of the times malware converge into these kind of stealer malwares, because again, it makes them a lot of money. And then it is stealthy most of the time. And, it just gets its job done. It just like takes the credentials and stuff and just like exfiltrates it, right? Because as compared to ransomware, yes, there are many types of ransomware out there, but you got to understand that once ransomware hits the target and then it starts doing its job, it starts encrypting the files, which is very, very noticeable and noisy, right? So you would immediately know that you are infected with ransomware. That probably means that the victim will start looking for tech support and, try to get whatever that's on. It's kind of similar to how, have you played, Plague Inc., the game? Yeah? So you know how you're not supposed to choose total organ failure in the start? Right? You're not supposed to do that, because if you do that, your host dies. And then there's no one to, spread that malware around. You want the host to stay alive and well, so it doesn't show symptoms, so it can just keep going around, spreading that to everyone, right? That's what you want not what I want, but or you want, but as this pathogen that's just trying to survive, right? So yeah, that's similar to that concept, kind of applies here, kind of as to why ransomware is, yes, there are many ransomware, but most of the time stealers is what gets the malware author a lot of profit while still maintaining persistence and staying there as long as possible, right? Yeah. So similar to how crabification works, just like how all these stealers are independently developed, but due to the fact that it has traits that allow it to survive and thrive is what keeps that going, right? Because it's so stealthy, even if you get infected, you're not going to notice it. So you're just going to let it stay there. And then it just keeps exfiltrating the data. And then because of that, malware authors are like, oh, this is actually working pretty great. So they just keep up with, they're not going to change anything, because you got to know, if you evolve something, right? It's also costly for the malware author to do that. And then most of the time, they want to be cheap. They don't want to spend excess resources on trying to update its tactics, right? So you just keep whatever works. Kind of like evolution. If it's good enough, then it just stays there.
Thanks very much.